Alright, welcome back to the tail end of Module 6. This is the fifth recording, fifth lecture, fifth video, whatever you want to call it, relative to Module 6. It's loops that we've been dealing with. Repetition. Doing things over and over again, multiple times. And we've dealt with while loops, for loops, incrementers, counters, break. So many things that we've dealt with in this module. Now, there's a concept that we call Sentinel Value. Now, a Sentinel Value, it's a special type of value that allows a different number of inputs for the user each time until, and we're looking for the user to enter that special value. So it'd be like me saying, enter your age, and I'm going to allow the user to do this task over and over again. Enter your age, I perform a calculation, boom, and I take them back up to the top of the loop. Enter their age, do it. Enter their age, do it. And our way to get out is having the user enter a Sentinel value. Whatever it may be, -99, XXX, we can have whatever we want, quit. Now, one of the things that we'll need to take into account when we're checking to see did they enter that Sentinel value is what they gave us. If we're talking about a number, is it the same format? That's not as important as if we're talking about the case of letters. So if I ask the user to enter quit, Q-U-I-T, how many different combinations of the word quit can they write and still have the word quit? There's an uppercase Q, lower U, lower I, lower T, uppercase Q, uppercase U, lower I, lower T. Man, we're going through a bunch. So there's a bunch of different combinations that we can come up with, and they are not all equivalent, because an uppercase Q is not equivalent to a lowercase q. They're not the same. They don't have the same ASCII value. So with that said, if I ask the user to input something, I want to convert it to a form that can be compared to the Sentinel value. The Sentinel value is a string of characters. If it's a word, if they potentially didn't enter uppercase, I'll convert the whole thing to uppercase and do an accurate comparison. Now, I showed you in the last module how to convert things to upper and lower. So if our Sentinel was a word, we convert it to whatever we wanted it to be, whether it's uppercase, lowercase, so I'm comparing apples to apples instead of apples to oranges. Okay, so that's what a Sentinel value is. I prefer to do it as a constant. It does not change, and I just refer to the constant. The logic here, while n is not equivalent to Sentinel. What is n? We ask the user to input a number. So here we declare and initialize n. User defined it. User gave us n. And as long as n was not -99, we got into that loop. What if the user had entered -99? We would not have even gotten into the loop, and we'd have said goodbye. And that's what happened here. So when I first ran this, enter a number to display -99 to quit. Well, I typed in negative 99. Goodbye. Well, let's do it again. 21. Negative 99. Okay? That's our Sentinel value in action. Okay. With this one, we ask the user to enter the score of the player or a -1 to stop. While score of the player is not equivalent to -1, let's do this. Well, we get down here and it says the average for the test is total score divided by score count. Total score is 0, score count 0. 0 divided by 0, you can't divide by 0, so it throws an error, division by 0. We will deal with that concept, the problem that took place there, in a later module. May deal with it in 8. But that'll be where we deal with try catch. We'll be trying things, and if they don't work the way I want them to work, I'll catch the error that the program comes up with. As it stands now, an error was thrown. That's the verbiage that we use. The program threw an error. If I catch it, we're good. If I don't catch it, it shuts my program down. So I want to catch these errors. So I try something. I could put a try block in here. Try this. And essentially what ends up happening is if an error gets thrown, a specific error, I catch it. Now, we've got these loops, and I want to talk about this before we get to upcoming modules where we're dealing with lists and dictionaries and sets. And in other languages, we will deal with arrays. We'll deal with matrices. It's things I've touched on before. I'll talk about them, even though they don't exist in Python. We will talk about them because it's something that is very important with what we're doing. Even though that class of code, that namespace may not exist, that concept, that functionality still does exist. Okay, and how we will navigate these multi-dimensional things. Let's say that ADJ, or adjective, is one list, fruits is another list. Well, what if I look at it that way? I'm going to go through the first one at a time. So in the first one, here's going through ADJ. Ooh, my dyslexia kicking in. And here's the next one. Going through fruits. So I go through ADJ one item at a time. So I get to the first item. That's red. Boom, red. So value in X is red. And I go through every item in fruits. Once I've gone through every item in fruits, I print it out 3 times, come back to the next item in ADJ. 3 times. Come back to the next item in ADJ. Now, we're going through this in a way that we're looking at two separate lists. And when we get to the next module, I want you to be able to look at this from the standpoint that if we were looking at an Excel spreadsheet, columns and rows, this first one, I can go through one row at a time. The next one, I go through each, or read each item in that row. So row 1, item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4. That'll get us through a two-dimensional array. Two-dimensional array is a chart. We can add another nested loop in there, and that'll get us through a three-dimensional array. And that was that Rubik's Cube that we talked about before. So nesting loops, we indent them. Indentation is huge in programming. Okay. And we'll deal more with this in future modules. I just want to touch base in this module before we got done. Now, one of the things that I hit on, I think, about the first video in this module is that in Python we have a for and we have a while. That's not all there is. There's a do loop or a do while loop. There's a for loop and a while loop. So we've got multiple kinds of loops, and the functionality associated with those loops is not all accessible in Python. So in C, C++, C#, we have this what's called a C-style for loop. And essentially we say, I don't need let. Let doesn't, I don't need to have that in there. Go ahead and leave that out. So we're going to say numbers equals, numbers is a list. For I initialized at 0, I is less than numbers dot length, or I is less than something, and then you increase or you increment I. You can go up by 1, you can go up by 2, you increase by whatever value you want. Now, that's the structure for this loop. We can't do that in Python. In Python, we say for n in numbers, print n. This one we said until we get to the end of numbers, print numbers I. I is the index that we went through. We started at 0. So we're doing, in here, we're doing it a little more explicitly. And we have a little bit more that we can do relative to how we go through the for loop. So in Python, we're just sticking to in a sequence for something in a specific sequence, or each item in a specific sequence. And whatever we called that, whether it was item, val, num, then we just say print num. Or I can use whatever I found in there and calculate with it, whatever I want to do. So I just want to touch base on this because this is something that is different in other languages. Okay? So I'm trying to be more comprehensive than just Python, so that when you get to another language, it's like, yeah, I was ready for this. I remember he talked about it. Right? This is an overall programming course, but I don't want to teach you programming without using a language. That'd be like me teaching you grammar without having you write a sentence or a paragraph. I want you to actually use a language. Use an easy language that's easy to learn. Python. It's robust. It's widely used. Most commonly used language that's being taught today. But that does not mean it's the only one. So I want you to be able to transition, should you need to, into other languages. Okay? So I'll see you in the next module.